Welcome to Project Based Python. These tutorials will not cover Python basics in depth. If you need help with the basics, you can try PyLearning Companion. It is a Python study app that covers all the core concepts in short lessons, then tests your skills with hundreds of activities. PyLearning Companion is available on Android and iOS. You can find the links in the video description. Today we will create a simple calculator that makes use of functions, loops, and if statements. Our calculator will allow users to enter two numbers and an operator, then print out the result. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is create a function that takes in 3 arguments. So we will start the function by typing def, and we'll call it calculate. And then we open and close parentheses. Here we need to pass in the different parameters that we're going to be looking for. So we will ask for a number, so num1, an operator, and another number. Now the order of these 3 parameters does not have to be number 1, operator, number 2. We can move them around, but I am keeping them in this order to make things a little bit easier later, and I'll explain that when we get there. So now we will use a colon, and for now we will just check if the operator is a plus sign, and we will add the 2 numbers. We can add subtraction, multiplication, and division afterwards. So first we say if operator equals plus. And now if this statement is true, we will return. Now we need to take the 2 numbers that we're passing in, and we're going to convert them to floats. We could convert them to integers, but we want the user to be able to use a decimal point. So we will just say float num1 plus float num2. Now that we have a basic operation here, we have addition covered, we are going to move on and we're going to create a while loop. In this while loop is where our program is really going to do its thing. So we will create a while loop, and we'll just say while true to make it a while loop that never ends until we actually break out of it. And the first thing we're going to do in the while loop is get the first number from the user. Here we will call the variable number 1 and set it to equal input, and we'll give them a prompt to say enter the first number. All right. Now what we want to do is we want to take that number, save it, then get the operator, and then get the next number. But before we get to that, I will actually perform a check to make sure that the user has actually entered a number and not a letter or something else that would cause a crash. So let's create one more function here. So we'll call this one number check, and we will just pass in the number. So let's just say num. And in this function, all we're going to do is just try float num. So what this is going to do is it will take whatever value we pass in, and it will check whether or not we can convert it to a float. And if we can, we will return true. It needs to be capitalized. And if it cannot turn the input into a number, we need to handle that with an exception. So except, and this would be a value error. And we will say print, please enter numbers only. And then we will return false. So the reason why I'm returning a value here is because we're going to use this number check as a Boolean. So we're going to create an if statement here. If number check, and then we pass in number 1. So what this is going to do is it will check whether or not we can convert the user input into a float. And if this is true, we can carry on with our code. And what we can do here is we can actually print whatever we have so far, sort of like a calculator does when you enter 5 plus 3. It will have the 5, then the plus sign, then the 3. So this will just be, it'll serve as a visual cue to the user. So we will print number 1. Okay. Now let's get the operator from the user. So we will create a variable called OP that will stand for operator, and we need to get the input, and for the prompt we will say enter the operator. And now we need to check whether the operator matches what we expect. So we are just going to check for a plus sign for now. So if OP equals plus, then we can carry on. So if the OP is plus, we can now get the next number. So let's first print what we have so far. So print number 1 OP. And then we're going to get the second number. So number 2 equals, and it'll be the same process that we had for number 1. So first we get the input, enter the second number, and now we need to perform another number check. So if number check number 2, and remember what this does is it will go into this function, check whether or not we can convert the number 2 that we pass in, whether or not we can convert it to a float. If we can, it is true. If we can't, it will return false. So for now, let's just assume that it returns true. And now we need to print the whole calculation. So we need to say print, and we're going to use a formatted string here. So F and then quotation marks. So the first thing we need to print is number 1. Then we print OP, that's the operator. Then we print number 2. And then equals. And now we need to call this function up here. So we are going to get calculate. And remember, we need to pass in the first number, the operator, and then the second number. So we pass in number 1, OP, and number 2. So if we run this now, we will, actually let's put a break here. All right. So now if we run this, we will get into the while loop. We will get the first number. If that first number can be converted into a float, we will get the operator. If the operator is a plus sign, we will print what we have so far, get the second number. If the second number can be converted into a float, we will print the first number, the operator, the second number, equals, and then the result of the calculation up here, which will be number 1, operator number 2, and we just have the addition, so we have number 1 plus number 2. So let's run this. And we have enter the first number, let's say 4, enter the operator, I will say plus, and enter the second number, 6, and we get 4 plus 6 equals 10. Now notice that 10 is actually 10.0. The reason for that is that we are converting these numbers into floats. If we converted them to integers, this would just be 10. But we want the user to be able to use a decimal point. That is why we're doing this. We can also round this number, but we're not going to bother with that for now. Now let's go back to our calculate function, and we're going to add support for minus, divided by, and times. So first we'll copy this, and I will just paste it 3 more times. We will change this to elif because we only want to handle, we only want to go through this once, so only one of these can ever be true at the same time. This is really just a precaution. It's probably unnecessary, but we'll do it anyway. And here we just need to change this to a minus, and divided by, and times. And then here we need to do the same. And once all this is done, we also need to perform a different kind of check here now. So we can't simply say if OP equals plus. We need to add other options. So OP can equal other things here. So we can say if OP equals plus, or OP equals minus, or OP equals divided by, or OP equals times. So now we can use any of these operators and our function up here will know what to do with them. So let's test this out. We have enter the first number, let's say 5, and let's go with times. Let's say 3. See, now we got 5 times 3 equals 15. Let's try another one. Let's say 22 and operator divided by, and let's divide by 11, and we get 22 divided by 11 equals 2. Let's add one more message to the user. So right now, if one of these operators is not recognized, so if we get an invalid operator, we simply just go back to the top of the while loop, which works but is not ideal. So if we run this, we get, let's say 5, and then instead of putting in an operator, I will just type in P, and we get enter the first number. So we just go right back to the top of the while loop. We can do this a little bit better. So we can create an else statement down here. We need to make sure that it is lined up with this if statement. So else print, and we will say invalid operator. Okay, and this will be much nicer. So now what we have is anytime we have an invalid number, this will be the message. So we say please enter numbers only. If we have an invalid operator, we will say invalid operator. So let's test this out. First, let's test out an invalid number. So W, we get please enter numbers only. Now we can get 6, and if we get an operator that is not recognized, like G for example, we get invalid operator, and then we can also do 8 divided by, and now for the second number, if we type in something else, we get please enter numbers only. So let's do this correctly. Let's do 55, and then times 2, and we get 110. Let's add one final feature to our program. So right now, if the user tries to do something like this, 5 divided by 0, we get a crash. So we get a 0 division error. The reason is we cannot divide by 0. So we can get around this by going inside this if statement here. We're going to first check if number 2 can be converted to a float. That's what we're doing here. And then we're going to create another if statement, and we're going to get the float value of number 2. So if float number 2 equals 0 and the user is trying to divide, so we need to make sure that OP equals division. We will have a print statement here. So print you cannot divide by 0. Then this code here needs to go into an else statement. So if the user is not trying to divide by 0, we can handle the calculation. So let's run this. And if I try this, so 66 divided by 0, and we get this message, you cannot divide by 0, and we go back to the top of the while loop. So now let's just perform a regular calculation. So let's just do 12 times 4, and we get 12 times 4 equals 48. If you have enjoyed this tutorial, make sure to like and subscribe. Also check out PyLearning Companion. The link is in the video description. You can also find the source code below.